150 years ago, the Red River War forever recast lives. Not only the lives of those who waged the Red River War, but each and every life since, even yours and mine. I am Andy Furnick, a filmmaker and local boy of the West Texas Panhandle, and I am with legendary historian Bill O'Neill to explore Undertold stories of the Red River War. A colossal celebrity in the realms of history. I'm telling you, a prolific author, lifelong educator, collegiate professor, governor-appointed Texas state historian. Did he really? He got to be governor. He said, I got to have a Texas state historian. There's only one guy who can do it.
No, there had already been two.
That's it.
There had already been two.
Oh, my goodness.
I was number 3.
Governor-appointed Texas state historian. A.C. Green Literary Award recipient.
Yeah, he was a legendary writer, of course. And it meant a great deal to me to get a writing award, based on A.C. Green. Boy, I love that.
No doubt. Lifetime Achievement Award from the Wild West Historical Association. Public speaker, presenter, athletic director, football coach.
Yeah.
Family man. I've heard people who adore you call you Wild Bill. Is that right? How'd that
When I was a boy, I was out in the hill country a lot, and they used to call me, this place, the town's growing now, but it was just a village in those days. They used to call me Wild Bill from Liberty Hill. I wasn't so wild back then. I was just a kid. But anyway, I guess it worked. I don't know.
Why history? What is it about history then in your career and now?
I have no idea. It just appealed to me tremendously. Everything about it did. I will say this. My grandmother, at the age of 7, came to Texas with her family in a wagon train from Mississippi, and she told me tales about that wagon train trek many, many times. My great-grandfather, on my other side, he was a Texas cowboy, rode for Pink Higgins. He didn't do any gunfighting for Pink, I don't think, but he did a lot of trail driving for him. So, I had those connections to the frontier, perhaps. And then, of course, you have to point out that you don't know who you are until you know who you were. Maybe I've always had a fascination with finding out who we were.
Brilliantly put. And here we are tonight in Spur, Texas.
Yes.
Where are your studies and your writing and your research? Where is your road taking you? You are still fully immersed in the historical scene of what you're doing.
I have one of the things I've done. I've written 58 books of history, and I have written things that I would like to read, and they hadn't been written yet, and so I would write the book.
I love that.
So that was one factor. And
you're still doing it today. Spur, Texas.
Yes.
We're at the back door in Charming Town, isn't this?
I love it.
Oh my goodness.
I love it here. Yeah.
Oh, it's just walk down the street and I'm surrounded by
That's right.
the past.
Here.
And well curated too. It isn't ruins of the past.
Right.
It is alive and it is very tangible and very palpable. Gorgeous little town.
Yeah, indeed.
People are really engaged in it.
Well, you talk about the Red River War. Let me start off with Mackenzie. He was an absolutely extraordinary guy. And certainly he was involved in the Indian campaigns out here, 3 of them. Randall Mackenzie was the son of a U.S. naval officer, and 2 of his brothers also were naval officers. So he had that in his background. Sadly, his father passed away when he was fairly young. They didn't have any funding for him to go to college, and so he got an appointment to West Point. And his brothers, he had a kind of a fragile build and all that, and his brothers thought, he's not going to do any good. He excelled at West Point. All kinds of, promotions to this and that and so forth. He was, they hit his button when they got him there.
But naval, though.
Yeah, that was it. That was the interesting thing. His father and 2 brothers were naval officers. And he went the other way, I guess perhaps because that appointment was easier to get or whatever. But in any event, he turned into an officer. Now, he entered West Point in 1858. He was born in 1840, so he was 18 years old. 1858, and he graduated in 4 years, despite the start of the Civil War. He graduated with his class of 62. He immediately goes into combat, and he proved to be a combat genius, and he went to the sound of guns. And as a result, and he fought the major stuff, golly, he fought at Chancellorsville, he fought at Gettysburg, he fought at all the big stuff, plus countless little things. And as a result of his style of combat, he was shot, he was wounded 6 times. And one of them, they shot 2 fingers off his right hand. And thus, when he became a campaigner in the Indian Wars, the Indians called him Bad Hand or 2 fingers. 3 fingers. He had 3 fingers left. So, and then when you hear some of the rest of the story, you'll think, oh boy, 6 wounds must have had a traumatic effect. And perhaps it did. He wanted to stay in the military and, how to do this. So he, like everybody else, he was a board general in the Civil War, just like Custer was. And like Custer, he was very bold and so forth. And so he was, I think, a major general of volunteers when the war ended, 2-star general. And like all those guys, he had to revert to, well, in Custer's case, he had to revert to lieutenant colonel. In McKenzie's case, he reverted to a regular rank of colonel. And the regiment he was assigned to was not going to see any kind of combat, some kind of artillery group or something. And he didn't like that. And so he finally accepted an appointment that he thought he could make work.
Now, sorry to interrupt, but I heard it said somewhere that Grant called him at the end of the Civil War the most promising
officer in the Army. That's right, he did. And Grant was right, because he was. He was better than anybody else. He was certainly better than Custer, even though Custer had been excellent during the Civil War with those large cavalry commands that he had and a very bold approach. He was just fine. He got into the Indian Wars. That was a whole new thing, and Custer did not fare well there.
But everybody was breveted then. You were saying everybody was reduced in rank.
That's right.
Okay.
They were reduced in rank, and his regular rank was colonel. And ultimately, after a couple of regimental assignments, ultimately he got the 4th Cavalry. As you may know, there were 10 cavalry regiments in the post-Civil War Army. There were 10 cavalry regiments, 24 infantry regiments, and then some artillery and stuff. And so he got one of the cavalry regiments, and he trained those guys like nobody else was doing. He worked those guys like crazy. He got Indian scouts, Seminole Indian scouts, and he wanted the Indian scouts to do that kind of work for him so as not to waste some of his manpower. And the first campaign he got involved with was in 1871. He was out in this country. You and I are in the Panhandle right now. And he marched the 4th Cavalry into Indian land. He didn't have much combat at all. He had a little bit, but he got a feel for what the Indian Wars of the West are going to be like, what the Indian Wars of the Plains are going to be like, horses and so forth. He he recovered about 1,000 or so Indian horses. 2 nights later, they came back. They were excellent horse thieves. They were superb at handling horses, and they stole them back. And he thought, okay, I'm going to remember that. Another thing is, in that campaign, he was wounded a 7th time. He caught an arrow in the leg. The doctor despaired. It was a pretty bad wound. The doctor despaired of his leg. And when he told him, he thought if McKenzie didn't get any more bed rest, then he was going to have to amputate. McKenzie blew up. He threw his crutch at the dock and everything. He was very combative, very aggressive. And sure enough, he recovered. And so the next year, he's back in the Indian Wars. And he comes back out, and he fights them with his extended knowledge and does great at it, uses those scouts that he had. Then in 73, he is asked to do something else. You see, he had a campaign a year for 5 years. He in the 4th, 71, 72, 73, 74, and 75. And so in 73, he and the 4th are stationed down in South Texas at Fort Clark, and that's near Brackettville. The reason for that is there were tribes of Indians in the northern part of Mexico who were slipping across the Rio Grande and raiding away, killing people, stealing stuff, stealing livestock, and they wanted it stopped. General of the Army Sherman said, "Now listen, you just go on and do whatever you need to do." And General Grant and Grant was now President of the United States. He said, "General Grant and I know what you're up against, and we're going to cover for you. You have to go to Mexico. It's illegal, but you go right ahead."
Kind of black ops. Sort
That's
of,
right. That's exactly right. And so he began to train his men for that. I mean, they sharpened their sabers to a fine cutting edge. They trained staying in the saddle for long, long periods of time and so forth. And finally, he had those Seminole scouts all over the place, and they finally caught some raiders. And these raiders had come across the border and hit some Anglo settlements and everything. And he said, "We're going after them." He saddled up his guys, not all of them. A regiment had 10 companies in it. But he got about half of his companies, totaling 200 and some odd men, and off they went. And they crossed the Rio Grande, which was an international faux pas. You didn't do that. Well, he did, because he had some backing from the top guys. And his men looked up and, they crossed the river and everything. The next morning when it's dawn, they said, "Wait a minute, the sun, wait a minute. Are we in Mexico?" "Yes, we are." And Mackenzie kept them in the saddle. Mackenzie and one officer and I think a few of his scouts were awake and operable for 70 hours during that action. 70 hours. Then he had other guys that were up. He ordered the guys to put as many cartridges as they could in their pockets, as well as hardtack. He said there's not going to be a chance for a couple of days with that. And so, okay. So they crossed over, and all they've got to eat, they're not bringing any pack mules or anything. They've got their own ammunition. And so they got down there, and there were 3 Indian villages in a row, just pretty close to each other, that the Indian scouts had found. It's at a place called Remolino. And they hit those 3 places at dawn, and they tore them up. And then they turned around, and now you and I are looking at, say, the Rio Grande, and he comes across here, and those villages are here. And he had ordered the rest of his regiment to come here.
From the other side. From
the other side.
So
they are going to defend the river crossing when Mackenzie and his guys come back across.
Kind of a big horseshoe. Enter at one point, scoop around, right, and then keep on going and make a big horseshoe and then recross the Rio Grande. Huh.
And so off he went. And those guys, he was afraid he was going to have to tie some of them into the saddle. They were so shot. But they went down there. But now remember, he has set the example. 70 hours, one of his officers and a few of his other men stayed up 70 hours during that action.
This is without, like in World War II, we had amphetamines and other things to keep the soldiers flying and stuff. But this is without any of that. Right. This is just, you will do this, and this is how we're going to do it.
And they did it, and they hit those camps, and then they turned around and came back not the same way, but came back to where these guys are supposed to be.
Their men holding open the crossing, more or less, right. Guarding the crossing.
They are guarding the crossing. They had already scouted out this crossing where they wanted to go. So they came around. They've got the blind staggers by now. And they crossed, and the crossing was defended by these fresh troops, and they were Mackenzie's troops, so they were good too. And the Indians did not dare to cross. And there was a real international dust-up about it. And these guys said, hey, now Mackenzie did that at least one other time also. And they didn't get any complaints after that. So that was his big, to me, that's the biggest action he ever fought, the most dangerous internationally and so forth. And he took complete advantage of the whole situation, and he did it. And then the next year is 74. And in 1874, by 1874, the Army has planned a strategy in which it is going to hit the high plains. And this is going to be the Indian War in the plains. They're gonna hit those Indians from 5 directions. They sent a group out from Fort Union in New Mexico, which is a huge supply post, and from 2 posts in Texas, from 1 in Oklahoma, and from another up in the north in Colorado. So here came these 5 columns. One of the columns, of course, is commanded by McKenzie and his guys. And McKenzie and the 4th, they knew something funny was going on with these Indians because they always found cover. They never could find them. And what they were doing was spending their winters down in Palo Duro Canyon. And nobody knew how to get them. There was only a narrow trail. Today you can drive down a highway, but
it's still pretty narrow.
It is. And I can only imagine. And McKenzie, they finally found the thing after dawn, about 7 o'clock in the morning. And it was a narrow trail. And he sent one of his companies, a crack company. They went ahead and they got on the floor of Palo Duro Canyon first. And they're supposed to go after the horses.
I heard you, sorry to interrupt, but I heard you at another interview a couple years ago. You were talking about he got his scouts again to get a hold of a Comanchero or somebody like that. And they worked on him a bit until
they worked him over and
he told them where it was.
He told them where it was.
Where's Palo Duro? How to get down there.
They told him everything he wanted to know.
A little persuasion.
Because they worked on him. It was these Indian scouts who were working the Comancheros over, and they spilling their guts. So, thus, they find this little narrow trail, and it was a hairy descent, but they all got down it. And the Indians were just appalled. This had been their winter retreat for however long. Year after year after year after year. And they had all of their winter supplies, an enormous amount of supplies of winter, the meat that was preserved and all that stuff. And they had all their equipment, their teepees, their blankets, etc. They had everything they needed for the winter. McKenzie and his guys got down there, and the first thing that happened is that company went after the horses. They gathered over 1,000 horses. Then McKenzie and his guys hit the floor at that point, and they attacked the villages, the huge village. And the Indians were just astounded, and they retreated up in the canyon walls, and they're shooting down what best they could. And McKenzie told these guys to get all of those teepees, all of the blankets, all of the winter clothing, and certainly all of the provisions, and burn it. And those Indians are up there looking down, and they're going nuts because there's winter.
Everything they own.
Everything. And they were all set for yet another winter down in Palo Duro Canyon, and they don't get it. And it's all destroyed. Furthermore, McKenzie puts those, if you know where Tulia is, McKenzie puts those horses, he had learned a lesson, remember, 3 years earlier. And he puts all those horses down in this canyon. And first of all, he got 300 of them for replacement horses. Let the Indians get what they needed, let the scout, and let everybody else. I mean, it ruined some of their horses getting them down.
That's right. They're cavalry.
So they got 300 of the very best Indian ponies. Then, because of what had happened that first year he was down there, they lined those horses up, shot them all. It was very hard on the men to do that because they had, they were horse guys, liked horses and stuff, but they did it because they knew why. And they shot all those horses. And when they shot those horses, they were just piled up down there.
I can't imagine that was a quick thing either. That many horses, you don't all take aim and fire.
Right.
This is a half-day operation.
He did have a full regiment at his disposal, so they were able to shoot them all down. And when they did, of course, coyotes came and all that stuff. Pretty soon there wasn't anything left but bones. And so the farmers began to go in there with their wagons, and they would load those bones up into the wagon. And those ground up bones made excellent fertilizer. And so that's what happened to the horses at Tule Canyon, Tule Canyon. And that's where the town of Tulia gets its name. And so he killed all those horses except the ones he needed. War as hell. He had a 5th campaign elsewhere the next year, not in Texas. But all of this stuff all those 4 campaigns have been in Texas.
That was his only engagement in the Red River War. What you just described was the Southern Great Plains.
This is the whole thing.
The five columns, right?
Yeah,
that was okay.
Yeah, the 5 columns.
And that was his only...
Now, bear in mind, that was in 74. In 76, General Sherman and General, now President Grant, come up with the same idea for all those Sioux and Cheyenne in the North Country. And they came up with another, kind of
convergence.
Convergence, if you will, except they didn't have as many columns. They had 3 columns, and one of them was Custer, and he was supposed to use his regiment to drive these guys into the 2 columns that were coming down. And that Glory Hunter, he ran his guys into the ground. It was middle of summer, July, and he ran those guys into the ground.
Custer, right? You're talking about not Ranald McKinze.
That's right.
Okay.
And Custer ran those guys into the ground on a hot day, and both horses and men were shot. And I say July, it was June 25th. And on June 25th, 1876, he closed with those people. Now, his horses are exhausted. His men are exhausted. It is heat of the day. And the Indians came out of there. They had a village of several thousand, some say about 7,000 teepees. That's men, women, and children. Thus, how many warriors are you talking about? Probably about 3,000 warriors. And he had divided his, don't divide your force in the face of the enemy. Well, he divided them 4 times. That goes back to that boldness with which he had won during the Civil War. Custer comes in there with those tired men, and he's got 5 troops, understrength troops, with his command, 250 guys. And then he's got a couple more troops here, a couple more troops here, a couple more troops there guarding the supplies. And he divided the command into 4 groups. He had the largest group, and his idea was to hit these people from up above, right in the middle of the village. And Major Reno was supposed to cross over the Little Bighorn River downstream with just a couple of companies. And the Indians came boiling out of those teepees. And they drove him back and were about to destroy those guys to a man when Custer brings his guys across. So they left Reno alone, and Reno comes stumbling back up the hill. And the other 2 groups are coming too. One with the supplies, and they all got together. The 3 surviving columns got together. They don't know what's happened to Custer. Within an hour, these thousands of warriors wiped them out. They just totally overwhelmed them. And that came, if you'll think about it, June 25th, 1876. That came within days of our centennial celebration. And here we are about to celebrate the 100th anniversary of this unique country. And word comes that a bunch of Indians had destroyed a column of one of the, every one of Custer's men was killed. And the thing about that was, now McKenzie, if you will, never got his men killed. That lesser generals, starting with Custer, did that. The other thing about McKenzie was, and this strategy of the convergence, this is coming from marching through Georgia Sherman and from Grant, who was the only guy who outranked Sherman during the Civil War. Their idea was to change the lifestyle of the Southerners. They were going to wipe out everything. They were going to wipe out railroads, going to burn plantations and cotton and everything else, and make slavery impossible. And that's what they did. Thus, when they turned to the Indians in the Red River War and in the troubles at the Little Bighorn, they are trying to do the same thing, trying to make the Indian way of life impossible. Let us wipe out their horses, their winter provisions, everything they've got. Let us make their nomadic lifestyle impossible, just as we did the Confederate slaveholding lifestyle impossible. People forget that part. Nobody remembers that those are the guys that did that, and they're doing it again during the Indian Wars. And boy, McKenzie had been a willing tool of that. That made sense to him. And so he went after those Confederates like crazy. And now then in the Indian Wars, he's doing the same thing and did.
Now, how much of that from his own writings? Does he have a bunch of journal writings or just military logs and stuff?
No, he did keep kind of a
no
diary,
memoirs or anything?
No. Here's the thing that happened to him. He started to lose his mind. And remember that he's been wounded 7 times now, the 7th wound coming in his first Indian campaign.
This is uncommon. Usually somebody's wounded a few times in either retires,
but he didn't do it. He was the best Indian fighter in the Army at the regimental level, and that's all they had. They didn't have divisions and stuff back then. They just had these 30-something regiments, so that's all they had, and he was the best regimental commander of the Indian Wars. General Miles was very good also, and he saw action in the Red River War, and later on proved to be an implacable foe of the Indians in those winter campaigns. So Miles was very good also, and Mackenzie, of course, and General Crook was very good too.
Now, these other men had multiple engagements, as I remember, in the Red River War.
That's right.
However, Mackenzie just had the one in the Red River War on the Southern Great Plains. His other engagements were outside of the purview of the Red River War.
Right.
He was down into Mexico on Black Ops, Secret Service
Now, whenever they had something really tough to do, that's who they called on.
They didn't mess around. They went to Mackenzie.
They went to Mackenzie. He was the best. What happens to him is, now all those colonels who are now colonels again, they've been generals in the Civil War. Now they're colonels and stuff. All those guys, including Custer, by the way, are just dying to get the one who was just implacable about this was General Miles. He lusted to get his stars back. And they had so few vacancies at that point. And a vacancy came open, finally. And so they're going to promote Mackenzie out of regimental command, and he's going to have a brigadier general star, which he certainly deserved. And about that time, he became engaged to a young lady in San Antonio. So the world is really looking up for him. At that point, he began to become unbalanced. And I think the psychology people today would say, oh boy, 7 wounds.
And they have a
traumatic stress, that must have played its part. They didn't want to do that to him. I mean, he was the great hero. He was the best they had. And they finally gave up on him because he was just, nobody could handle him. They moved him to Washington, D.C. His sister tried to take care of him, and he was just totally Lulu.
In all senses of like self-care and interaction, lucid thought and expression, everything.
He's lost it. This brilliant guy has lost it. And so they put him on the retirement list, not voluntarily retired. So they put him on that. His sister took care of him for a couple of years, and then he died. He was 48 when he died.
Only 48.
Only 48. And there he had pulled it off, of all people, and nobody better than he could do it. In combat, he had earned his star yet again, and he had shown everybody how to do it with Indian scouts and with this and with marksmanship and all this stuff. And then he went nuts. He lost his head. And I think, very, very, very much everybody thinks that it was all those wounds.
What's coming to mind as you're describing this is a lot of the studies that I've done, especially in the ledger art that we were talking about earlier today. There is a way of showing rank, also accomplishment, counting coup, they call it. That the Native war chiefs and the Native American war heroes could count and list also in art form how many times they had been that daring and survived.
Right. Yeah.
How many times they'd been wounded and survived.
Yeah.
So on an equivalent level, he would be right at the top.
Chief.
Mackenzie would be the great chief.
Nobody's going to get wounded 7 times with those old soft lead bullets.
Oh.
Nobody's going to get wounded 7 times and live, but he did.
Yeah, this isn't a 22 passing through your arm and you're okay.
He was...
and one time an arrow, you said.
He lost those fingers, and whenever he would get impatient, which was increasingly the case, he would hit those finger stumps with his thumb, and his men just hated it because they think, God, don't quit.
Here it comes. Here it comes. Oh, no.
Oh, he was the best army had, without question, and he did not intend to become a warrior, and then, boy, did he become one. Wow.
What do you think about, as I understand, getting into the Red River War, or as they called it, the Indian Wars and Campaigns, the engagements against the Native American tribes? They failed miserably at first, I think, because they didn't understand how to engage in warfare.
had a hard time pinning them down. And the Indians would fight in that Red River War. They would get off at a distance and they're shooting at them. And so the Army's trying to figure out a way to get up there, and they get out in the open and they get shot. And while they're getting shot, well, some of these warriors are retreating. And of course, they're covering the retreat of their women and children. And that was a part of the thing. You got to get your families out of dangerous way.
Very family oriented from what I understand. And that was, it wasn't that they, earlier depictions, I suppose, where in Hollywood especially, that the Native American was depicted as being bloodthirsty or whatever. Everything I hear, and the more I study and learn from all of you, they did not.
That's right.
They were not bloodthirsty. All they were doing was trying to engage the enemy long enough to let the women and children and elderly escape.
That's right.
And then once that was done, they were out of there too. They're like, no, thank you. You know, I got better things to do than fight in the... The other thing is that it sounds like Mackenzie in many ways pioneered much of the stratagem to be able to combat, to be able to engage. Had it not been for Mackenzie, maybe they wouldn't have been so successful. It'd taken them a lot longer and many more casualties to learn how to clear the plains. Very interesting. Kind of a fulcrum of a character then in the history.
Yeah, I think so.
Bill O'Neill, how did we get so lucky to have you? Thank you.
Oh, golly, I hope it made a little sense.
Oh, my goodness. Not just that, but it is. You were a storyteller. I'm telling you, through and through, it's one thing to be able to study facts and details, but if you can engage minds and hearts when people listen,
some of this stuff just makes sense, doesn't it? You know, like, well, of course, that's why they did it.
You're very keenly aware of the psychological aspects, the psyche of all of the contextual elements at the time that might have caused someone to make this decision or that.
Right.
Very important. You can't just...
That's right.
You can't study history in isolation.
Yeah. And those senior commanders who were really good, boy, they're lieutenants, captains, who were also good, the ones that were good, not lazy. Had a lot of drinkers in the Army and stuff, you know. But the ones who were ambitious and so forth, boy, they really, picked up a lot of stuff from guys like a Mackenzie or somebody.
I can imagine that...
and Custer's guys, now they all thought he was a turkey bird. He abused his men, pushed them too hard and all this stuff.
Yeah, you can't really generalize about anything. You can't say, oh, the Army was bad. Oh, the Army was good. You can't, you got to study individual cases. Right. There's light and dark. Chiaroscuro, as the artists say, in all things.
Yeah.
Good characters and those less savory.
Yeah.
What would you like to say anything about your book, where listeners can get it or who it's about? Or?
Well, my most current book is about John Salmon Rip Ford. That was his nickname. And he was, the subtitle of the book is John Salmon Rip Ford, Texian Hero. He preferred the term Texian. He came to Texas just as the revolution was successfully completed. And he was only about 20 years of age, and he would stay in Texas more than 6 decades until his death in 1897. And he was a combat ranger. He put it on the line, and he got 1,000 wonders he didn't get killed, but he was a terrific combat ranger. And that included leading his so-called cavalry of the West during the Civil War to the final victory of the war on behalf of the Confederacy. The Yankees had won and forced Lee's surrender about a month earlier. And then all of a sudden at the Battle of Palmetto Ranch, the Confederates won about a month later. That was his finale.
He's in charge there.
Yes, and he had fought in the jungles of Mexico during the war with Mexico, and he fought all over the frontier. And then he fought throughout the Civil War and won the last battle of the Civil War. He was really, really something else. He was an incredible warrior on behalf of Texas.
What's the name of the book? Rip Ford?
John Salmon, Rip Ford, Texian Hero. And it has proved very popular with audiences. And I think maybe one of the reasons is because this guy was a Renaissance man. He was a man of all seasons. He was a physician, a frontier surveyor. He laid out a trail through the Big Bend country. He did just about everything you can imagine. He was a frontier editor. The habit in those days was for an editor to get together with a printer. And so here's the man of skill versus the man who can write. And he started papers like that all over the state of Texas. And he was very outspoken. Rip Ford was married 3 times, had several children, had some tragedy occur in his life. He taught Sunday school classes in the really early days at both Austin, Log Cabin Village, Austin, and at St. Augustine. And he also was mayor. He was elected in absentia. He was not there either time. He was elected mayor of Austin in 1850-something. And 20 years later, he was elected mayor of Brownsville.
It reminds me of, they must do this a lot in Texas. Ada Lester on another episode was telling us about Emmanuel Dubbs up in Wheeler County that was elected the first judge of Wheeler County, and he was in absentia as well. He wasn't there.
Yeah,
so they're just like, well, let's pick who's not here right now.
Stick them with it.
Stick them with it. It's their deal.
So he was really something else besides just a combat veteran. But the combat part was true too.
Dynamic character.
He was indeed.
Dynamic
indeed, fearless. And he promised his mother that she died young, and he promised her request that he would read the Bible every night. And he did. But I'll tell you what, I think he kind of skipped over the meek and mild part of the Bible. And he was more interested in the warrior kings, King David, Samson, and so forth. And he identified with them, and he did the best he could to defend his chosen people, if you will, the Texans, from the barbarians who were knocking at the gates, the Mexican banditos, the war parties and Yankee invaders and so forth. And so he was a defender of Texas and Texana. He wrote widely about that, and he left behind an enormous amount of writing.
Where can we find the book? Where are we going to buy it?
Well, you can find it from me.
We got to chase you down then. We can't find it on Amazon or anywhere?
It's on stuff like that. And it is published by Aiken Press, Eakin, Aiken Press.
Aiken Press, or on Amazon, or we just chase you down. We find you, and
that's right. Chase me down.
Take one from.
I'll sign it from you.
A pair of pantyhose over the face and a pistol.
There you go.
Give us your book.
There you go.
Is your book on tape, or any of your books on tape?
Yeah, some of them are on tape. There's one called Frontier Forts of Texas that is on tape. My book, Encyclopedia of Western Gunfighters, that was the first book I ever did. That's on tape, I understand.
I tell you what, it has been the greatest pleasure. Indeed.
Oh,
Thank
my
you
pleasure.
So much.
This is fun. It's so good to get to talk. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Wheeler County Historical Commission and the Frontier Regiment of the High Plains.